Hello, and welcome to Matter of Fact, a podcast from the Roy Howard Community Journalism Center, where we report what matters. I'm your host, Hilawe Tibebe. With support from the Scripps Howard Foundation, our center works to counter misinformation and strengthen truth-based journalism across communities in Southeast Mississippi. Today's episode highlights our RHCJC news article, St. Martin Housing Growth Sparks School Rezoning in Jackson County. In this episode, we'll explore how development in St. Martin is influencing school attendance, and what the rezoning proposal means for the community. Later, we'll hear from junior reporter J.C. Roberts, who covered this story and spoke with both district leaders and residents to better understand the impact of the proposed changes. Across Mississippi's Gulf Coast, new neighborhoods are appearing in communities that once looked very different. Research from Coast 85 shows that home values across the Gulf Coast are experiencing 2% to 4% year-over-year growth, a sign of continued development across the region. But as housing development grows, so does the demand placed on public institutions, including schools. In Jackson County's St. Martin community, the population is growing and beginning to influence how local schools manage student enrollment. District leaders say that if those attendance zones stay the same, the growing population could mean more students crowding into schools that are already filling up. To prepare for that possibility, the district is planning to implement updated school attendance boundaries in the St. Martin area beginning this fall. Superintendent David Baggett said that the district began discussing potential rezoning as early as 2021, as officials monitored population trends and housing development in the area. School board members first addressed the issue during a district meeting in November 2025. And according to Baggett, enrollment in St. Martin schools is already approaching capacity. District leaders say adjusting attendance boundaries is one way to prevent overcrowding and keep enrollment balanced across nearby schools. The rezoning plan also includes a provision allowing currently enrolled students to remain at their existing schools if their families choose. However, parents who decide to keep their children at a school outside the new attendance zone would be responsible for providing transportation. While district leaders say the proposal is meant to prepare for future growth, not everyone is convinced the timing is right. Our reporter spoke with Vancleave resident Kaylee Dominy, who said she first heard about the rezoning online and started wondering why it's taking place.
So I actually saw a Facebook post about it, and I just kind of skimmed over it a little bit, and it kind of, got me thinking, like, why are they rezoning? Because it's weird to me.
Dominy said one of her concerns is whether schools have the resources to keep up with the growth.
Our schools have not been updated in quite some time. The only school that's had any updates to it that I know of is the upper elementary, and the lower is still the same from when I went to school there in 2005. And I feel like that we need more classrooms and more teachers, because I feel like there's going to be too many kids in one classroom, because there's already 25 plus kids in every class. And I feel like they're just putting a lot more on the teachers, but not adding more resources to it as well.
She also questioned whether the rezoning is timely to begin with.
People are moving here. They need houses to buy. It'll up property and all of that. Personally, I'm not a fan of subdivisions, because this has always been a small town where everyone knows everyone and, everyone's friends with everyone. But I do understand that times are changing also. But I personally would not even consider the rezoning if I were on the board until that housing was close to being finished and people were starting to buy houses. Because why go ahead and move these kids that are already in St. Martin for houses that aren't even built yet?
District officials say they plan to reach out directly to families who may be affected by the changes and provide more details about what the transition will look like. They also plan to offer school tours so students who may be reassigned can visit their potential new campuses ahead of time.
If a parent loves a school, let them keep their kids there. If they're still, within the area, even though the bus isn't coming, you let them bring their kids to school and pick them up, because that's where they want to go. That's what they know. Some parents don't want to do that. Some don't want to adjust to, a new school.
For families in the St. Martin and Vancleave communities, the proposed rezoning reflects a challenge many growing areas face: how to keep schools balanced as new neighborhoods continue to expand. Now we're joined by RHCJC part-time reporter JC Roberts. He played a key role in reporting this story. JC contacted district officials and community members to understand both the planning behind the rezoning proposal and how that affects families in the area. JC, thanks for joining us. So, JC, if you could just give our listeners that haven't read the story a little context as to what the rezoning is and who it affects.
Okay, so last school year, the Jackson County School District Board, they approved the rezoning, which basically will affect St. Martin residents as well as Vancleave residents, and they're going to create boundary lines around the routes that the buses are going to go on, as well as how many students can attend a certain school based on the area. And this is to lower the overcrowding at St. Martin East.
So with the communities of St. Martin and Vancleave, are they both in the same school district or separate, or do they have their own separate school districts?
They're in the same school district, but the schools are a little bit apart from each other. Not too far, but they're apart from each other. And St. Martin East, as of right now, has the highest enrollment.
So when you first began reporting the story, what were some of the first couple questions that you had?
Well, it's really the new housing developments that are coming to St. Martin that are making this an issue, because they said this has been an issue for the past few years that they've been trying to fix. So one of my main concerns is how will this affect the families in general, what's being done about it, how easy was that communication from the school district board over to the parents, and what are the next steps, or is one of the first steps bus routes? Is that going to be something, or is it literally moving somebody else's kid to another school, or letting them know, hey, if you live in this area, are you going to be going to this school in this area that might be a little bit further away?
Because this is a big change for the community, so you wanted to understand how the change was going to come into play. Were there any differences that stood out to you in the ways that officials viewed the rezoning plan opposed to parents of the community? And if there were, what were some of those differences?
The difference definitely was that the school district board just felt like it was something they had to nip in the bud. They were just it's only going to be a few students in each area that's going to be affected by it. Whereas when I spoke to parents, they were like, oh no, for instance, Vancleave, they're like, oh no, my son's already going to an overcrowded school. Why is all of this happening? We don't even have the housing developments in St. Martin yet. And I spoke to a St. Martin resident, and they're like, oh, well, my kid's being forced to ride with kids with upperclassmen. And they had concerns about, how they're going to be providing transportation for their own kids. How early do they have to get up now versus when, that boundary line wasn't created. So just things like that. You could just really see the difference of the situation and how everybody's navigating it.
And it's interesting because like you said, the school board the school district may have an easy fix, or what they think might be an easy fix. It may not be as easy to actually apply to these communities who are already used to their daily routines. I know that me personally, I had to do a little research to learn about what this rezoning was and what rezoning was in general. And it can be a complex issue to explain. How did you approach breaking down the boundary changes in a way that readers could understand?
I will say that I had to first think to myself, okay, so what's the problem? What's the problem? What is the main reason? And honestly, it being two different problems kind of helped me understand it more, because I feel like sometimes when you have just one issue, it can become kind of broad, or either it could be just very narrow. So realizing that a problem with that is new housing development, which is what the school district board said, as well as overcrowding at St. Martin East. Just kind of breaking down those numbers, like I said, with the how much students go to St. Martin East, breaking that down compared to Vancleave students and St. Martin North students. I feel like that helps show them, oh my God, this many kids really go to my kid's school. That's just something that I feel like is easy to understand better. People love to look at numbers.
And what were some of the main things that you wanted people to take away from this story? What did you want to inform the St. Martin residents?
What I wanted to inform them of is that there are reasons for this, and the school district isn't just doing it. They're not just doing it just to be doing things, because I feel like a lot of people, they think school district boards, they're very inconsiderate and they don't care about anything. But one of their concerns was they did not want schools to be overcrowded. As one of the residents told me, Vancleave Elementary is overcrowded as already. So that is something that they do want to manage. But as of right now, they felt like the best thing to do was to kind of merge those students between the two different elementary schools in order to kind of balance everything out.
So when you were out reporting in the community, what did you learn about how residents feel about the growth happening in St. Martin that you mentioned earlier?
Honestly, somebody said that they didn't see, well, one of the residents I spoke with, they said that they didn't really see a difference in housing. They said that they've heard about it, but they're like, oh, well, is this really timely, you know? Are you making these changes too soon? Like, what is the point of this if the kids aren't going to be affected immediately? And honestly, I see where she's coming from, but I don't really blame the school district for trying to make those changes while they can, so it won't be so chaotic once those developments do come in.
Yeah.
But I understood where she was coming from, because now the school that her kid goes to is kind of in jeopardy, or she don't feel like they have the resources to manage all of these new kids.
That makes sense. And lastly, I know this is your most independent story yet. What did this story teach you about covering education issues and community development?
This story just kind of taught me that, it's just as important to get both perspectives of everything. You know, when I first heard from residents about what was going on, I'm like, this is horrible. You know, why is the school district doing this? Oh, come on now. Like, you can't be serious. Why are you doing this? And why are you doing this so early? And then even trying to research and find housing developments, I was like, are they really doing this? I don't even see anything. I don't see anything. But then, listening to that meeting and then, reaching out to some of the board, I realized that this is something they've been trying to fix over the years, because all this overcrowding, all these kids that live in the area, that live on the coast, they're trying to balance out everything. So I feel like this kind of just showed me, part of what we do here, navigating both perspectives of everything, and also really just like reaching out and being more willing to understand everybody that I'm kind of interviewing, I would say.
And like you said, for us here at the center to make sure that we're reporting the unbiased truth, it's always important to maintain the perspectives of both sides of whatever issue we are reporting on. JC Roberts, thank you for your reporting and for giving us a closer look as to what's affecting the St. Martin community. Now it's time for What is True, our fact-checking segment, where we break down common claims, talk about how to verify them, and give you the tools to spot what's real. Joining us is Walker Scott, our What is True Media Literacy Coordinator. Walker is over our fact-checking investigations and leads the center's Ask Me What is True community media literacy trainings. Walker, when audiences hear about school rezoning or enrollment growth, what media literacy skills can help them better understand the issue?
From a media literacy perspective, one of the most important skills is source evaluation. Listeners should pay attention to where the information is coming from, whether it's a school district official, a public document, a resident speaking from personal experience, or a journalist summarizing verified records. Education stories about rezoning are often based on public data such as enrollment numbers, demographic projections, and school board decisions. These documents help confirm that claims about growth or overcrowding are grounded in verifiable data. Another important skill is contextual thinking. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, enrollment planning and school boundary adjustments are common strategies districts use to manage shifts in population and prevent overcrowding in rapidly growing areas. Understanding that context helps audiences see why rezoning discussions may happen before new housing developments are fully occupied.
So, education stories often include statistics, projections, and public meetings. How can listeners evaluate those sources to understand what is factual versus opinion-based?
One useful approach is to separate data from interpretation. For example, enrollment numbers, school capacity statistics, and official boundary maps are factual records. These are typically drawn from school district reports or public meeting materials. When journalists cite those documents, they are presenting verifiable information. Listeners should also consider how information is documented. Organizations such as the Mississippi School Boards Association note that board meetings and planning discussions are intended to give the public transparency into decisions like attendance zone changes. When journalists reference those meetings, they are grounded in their reporting in documented government proceedings rather than speculation.
So, when journalists include perspectives from both officials and residents, how does that help audiences better understand the complexity of these policy decisions?
Including multiple perspectives helps audiences see both the reasons for the policy and its real-world impact. According to the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics, journalists should diligently seek subjects of news coverage to allow them to respond to criticism or allegations of wrongdoing. Including multiple viewpoints helps ensure audiences receive a fuller picture rather than a single narrative.
Lastly, From a media literacy standpoint, why are stories like this important for helping communities stay informed about decisions that affect their daily lives?
Local education decisions, including rezoning, directly affect families, students, and neighborhoods. Stories like this help residents understand how and why those decisions are being made, which is essential for civic participation. Research consistently shows that local journalism plays a critical role in helping communities stay informed about government decisions. The Pew Research Center has found that local news outlets are often the primary source of information for residents trying to understand school policies, infrastructure projects, and other community decisions. From a media literacy perspective, these stories also demonstrate how information moves from public meetings to public understanding. When journalists report on school board decisions, verify enrollment data, and include community voices, they help translate complex policy decisions into information that residents can use to make informed decisions.
And that's what is true with Media Literacy Coordinator Walker Scott. You can learn more about the program or submit a question of your own at rhcjcnews.com/WITREQ or by calling 601-266-TRUE. That's 601-266-8783. This episode was adapted from our RHCJC news article, St. Martin Housing Growth Sparks School Rezoning in Jackson County. A special thanks to the team behind the story, junior videographer McKenna Clam, and of course junior reporter JC Roberts, whom we heard from earlier in the show. You can read the full story and explore related reporting at rhcjcnews.com. Be sure to follow us on social media at RHCJC News to stay up to date. As always, thank you for listening and for spending time with us as we take you behind the scenes of the Roy Howard Community Journalism Center. I'm Hilawe Tibebe, and this is Matter of Fact.